On winter nights in towns like Frost Harbor, the world feels quieter than it should be, as if the snow itself is holding a secret. Somewhere beyond the last pine tree, in a cabin touched by cold winds and old memories, a man who once walked with a brave K9 partner tries to survive another silent winter. But fate has a way of knocking on the door when we least expect it, sometimes in the shape of footprints in the snow, sometimes in the sound of a storm that refuses to be ignored. Before we begin this story of courage, second chances, and the vow of 5 German shepherds who refuse to abandon hope, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me the name of your town in the comments, and let this winter journey find its way to you. Winter arrived early in Frost Harbor that year, drifting down from the northern ridgelines like a quiet army of white ghosts. The town, perched on the upper mountains of Northern California, was the kind of place where the wind learned to howl before children did, where pines bowed under ice as if praying, and where houses stood like stubborn lanterns against the cold. Snow swallowed the narrow roads, muffled footsteps, and turned every breath into pale silver smoke. And within this frozen stillness, in a lonely cabin beyond the last pine on Harbor Road, lived Officer Owen Callahan, a man shaped by duty, loss, and the ghost of a German shepherd whose absence still weighed heavier than winter. Owen Callahan, 45 years old, carried the kind of presence that spoke before he ever opened his mouth. Tall, rugged, and broad-shouldered, he had the steady posture of someone who had spent 2 decades in uniform and another lifetime learning how to stand alone. His dark blonde hair, sprinkled early with gray near the temples, framed a face weathered by cold patrols, sleepless nights, and memories he never invited but never escaped. His eyes, a deep storm gray, always looked as if they were listening for something the world had forgotten how to say. Once, Owen had been a celebrated K9 handler, known for his patience, sharp instincts, and unwavering sincerity. But everything changed a year ago, when Blaze, his partner, a German shepherd with a heart as fierce as wildfire, died in an explosion while saving a child during a hostage situation. The event shattered something inside Owen. He withdrew from his unit, from friends, and from Frost Harbor itself, choosing a decaying cabin at the edge of the forest to grieve in silence. He still talked to Blaze some nights, though only the frost-covered windows heard him. He still kept Blaze's collar on the mantel, though dust gathered around it like a shrine. And when evening settled, Owen would sometimes feel the old panic of that night. The flash, the roar, the weight in his arms, hit him all over again. But Frost Harbor was not a place where silence lasted long. The mountains always found a way to stir trouble. That morning, while Owen drove his patrol SUV through layers of fresh snow, the dispatcher radioed in a strange report. Multiple residents near the abandoned lumber warehouse claimed they had been hearing dogs barking, long, strained, relentless, echoing through the storm since dawn. The local animal control unit was overwhelmed with damaged fences and livestock emergencies due to the freezing rain, and Owen happened to be the closest patrol car to the area. "Callahan, can you check it out? Last thing we need is any more accidents," the dispatcher said. Owen hesitated, dog calls still twisted inside him, but duty was a chain that never let him wander far. "Copy that. I'll head over," he replied, though his voice carried the weight of something unspoken. The abandoned warehouse sat at the edge of Frost Harbor's industrial district, a stretch of land that had been left to rot after the old lumber company shut down 7 years earlier. Snow draped the collapsing roof like a heavy shroud. Icicles hung from warped beams, and the surrounding yard was a graveyard of rusted saws and broken pallets. Few people ever walked this way anymore. It was too quiet, too forgotten. And perhaps that was why the dogs had ended up here, because cruel humans always chose forgotten places to hide forgotten things. Owen parked his vehicle near the loading ramp and stepped out into the icy wind. His boots sank into snow almost to the ankle. The barking had stopped by the time he approached, but the silence felt heavier than any storm. A man who had spent his life reading danger could feel it crouching in the shadows. He pushed open the warehouse door, and the hinges screamed like an animal in pain. The interior was dim, lit only by cold daylight seeping through holes in the roof. The scent hit him first: fear, damp fur, old blood, and metal. For a split second, Blaze's memory flickered before him, as if his old partner were walking beside him. "Easy," Owen whispered to the darkness. though he didn't know whether he was speaking to himself or whatever waited inside. As his eyes adjusted, he saw them. 5 German shepherds huddled in a corner behind a line of discarded crates. They were chained with new steel links, each link cutting red marks into their fur. The dogs were thin, trembling, ribs pressed against their skin. Snowmelt dripped from their paws. They looked exhausted, starving, yet still too proud to whimper. Each one carried the physical marks of harsh handling. The largest of them, a massive male about 3 years old, with a thick sable coat and a broad, square muzzle, lifted his head slowly when Owen stepped closer. His eyes were gold brown, steady, painfully intelligent. Not aggressive, not feral, just pleading. This dog would later be named Atlas, but in that moment he was only a battered guardian trying to protect the others by sheer presence. Behind him was a smaller, wirier male with sharply pointed ears and quick eyes. Wren, though Owen didn't know the name yet. Next to Wren sat Bishop, a bulky dog with a darker saddle coat, breathing heavily as though every inhale hurt. Echo, thin but alert, watched Owen with ears twitching, observing every shift in the air. And furthest in the shadows, curled into a trembling ball, was a young, light-colored German shepherd, barely 18 months old, the smallest of the group. This one had softer eyes, almost apologetic, and the way he pressed himself into the corner told a history of fear. That one, Owen would later call Solace. The sight punched something deep in Owen's chest. He had seen neglected dogs before, but something about these 5 was different. They were trained, not street strays, not wild. Their posture, their gaze, even the way they positioned around. The largest male? They were a unit, and they had been abandoned deliberately. Chains were new. Footprints, barely visible under melting snow, suggested humans had been here recently. Perhaps smugglers, illegal dog-fighting rings, traffickers who took advantage of the recent snowstorm to move shipments unnoticed. Snow earlier in the week had been so thick that no rescue team could climb the industrial ridge. These dogs had likely been left to freeze when criminals panicked and fled. But why leave trained German shepherds? Why in the middle of a storm? Owen stepped closer, and the largest dog, Atlas, shifted his weight, placing himself between Owen and the others. Not threatening, just guarding. Owen recognized the behavior instantly. Blaze used to stand like that. That thought alone made his throat tighten. "Easy, boy," Owen murmured, lowering himself slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dogs watched him without blinking. In their eyes, he saw exhaustion, hunger, caution, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Something inside him cracked. He reached out his gloved hand toward Atlas, slowly, letting the dog smell the cold leather. Atlas leaned forward, hesitated, then gently pressed his nose against Owen's knuckles. A fragile pact, a surrender born of desperation. That single touch unraveled every wall Owen had built since Blaze died. He swallowed hard, fighting the tremor in his voice. "I won't leave you here," he whispered. It was not regulation. It was not protocol. It was not what a by-the-book officer should say or do. But Frost Harbor's winter had never cared much for rules, and neither did Grief. The logical decision would have been to call animal control, secure the area, and wait. But the roads to this warehouse were nearly frozen shut. The temperature was dropping fast. These dogs had maybe a few hours before hypothermia claimed them. And worse, if the smugglers returned for any reason and found him here, the dogs would become evidence to eliminate. Owen rose to his feet and began releasing the chains one by one. Wren flinched at first, then stayed still as the cold metal loosened. Bishop let out a low grunt, relief melting into his posture. Echo sniffed the air and then leaned forward curiously, as if analyzing Owen's scent for truth. Solace trembled so hard, Owen had to kneel and whisper reassurance before the small shepherd allowed himself to be touched. When Atlas's chain finally fell away, the big shepherd did not run. He simply stepped closer, as if anchoring himself to Owen's presence. "Come on," Owen said quietly. "Let's get you home." Home. He had not used that word in a long time. He gathered them into his patrol SUV, 4 in the back, and Solace curled gently on the floorboard against the heater vents. It was chaos, fur, shivering, and the piercing smell of fear. But to Owen, it felt like the first heartbeat he had felt in months. Snow thickened as he drove toward the Lonely. cabin, headlights carving tunnels through white darkness. Owen kept glancing in the rearview mirror where Atlas's amber eyes reflected the light. Steady, watchful, trusting with a kind of raw vulnerability that made his chest ache. He did not know it then, but this simple act, this reckless decision driven by instinct and memory, would change the course of his life. And in the storm of Frost Harbor, beneath the weight of winter, 5 abandoned shepherds followed him into a future none of them could yet imagine. Dawn came late to Frost Harbor, as if the sun itself hesitated before stepping into the cold. Snow piled against the windows of Owen Callahan's cabin, muting the world into pale silence. The pines surrounding the property were bent under fresh drifts, and the distant mountains glowed faintly blue, like frozen giants waiting for breath to return. Inside, heat from the wood stove seeped slowly into the air, thin, fragile warmth trying its best to fight winter's stubborn grip. Against this background of quiet cold, 5 German shepherds stirred in their new shelter. Their fur glistened faintly in the firelight, their breaths rising in little clouds as they shifted, sniffed, and tried to understand this unfamiliar place. They had arrived broken, trembling, the night before, yet morning light made them appear almost hopeful, as though the cabin's warmth had begun stitching the first threads of safety into their hearts. Owen, still in his uniform from the night before, sat on the wooden floor, leaning against the couch with an exhaustion that went far deeper than lack of sleep. He watched them carefully, noting every twitch, every pacing step, every signal of tension. He had slept little, not because he was overwhelmed, but because some part of him, long numb, had begun to feel again. For the first time in nearly a year, the cabin felt inhabited by life rather than silence. The largest shepherd, the one Owen had instinctively started calling Atlas, though he had not yet spoken the name aloud, lay near the fireplace. Atlas was a commanding dog, 3 years old, roughly 90 pounds, his thick sable fur catching gold in the firelight. His ears stood tall, his posture straight even while resting. He had the presence of a quiet leader, the kind who didn't need to growl to command a room. Atlas watched Owen with the calm caution of someone who had protected others for a long time. Behind him, the wiry shepherd with sharp eyes moved constantly. This was the one who would later become Wren. His build was leaner, his paws lighter, and his reactions quick, sometimes too quick. The world had taught him to expect danger at every turn. He skirted the room restlessly, sniffing corners, circling back to check on the other dogs, then glancing at the front door as if expecting shadows. Bishop, the broad-shouldered shepherd with a darker saddle coat, lounged just a few feet from Owen. Older than the others, perhaps 5, he carried weight both in muscle and in spirit. He wasn't as quick as Wren or as analytical as Echo, but there was strength in him, the steady kind meant for pulling and protecting. Echo, smaller than Bishop but sharper in every movement, sat near the window. His fur was a blend of tan and black, darker around the eyes, giving him an almost fox-like alertness. Echo's ears flicked constantly. He observed everything: the wind, the branches tapping the roof, the shifting snow. And then there was Solace. Barely out of puppyhood, his fur, a soft cream mixed with light brown, Solace curled close to the couch, shivering even though the stove burned steadily. His ribs still showed, and his eyes, though gentle, carried uncertainty every time Owen approached. Unlike Atlas, who faced the world head-on, or Wren, who challenged the world before it challenged him, Solace simply wanted to disappear into warmth and safety. Owen understood that too well. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. The last thing he had expected in his life was this: 5 broken shepherds scattered across his cabin floor, each with a story written in scars. He was not ready. He was not healed. But somehow, he could not imagine having left them behind. A knock echoed through the cabin door. The dogs reacted instantly, ears perked, bodies stiffening, Wren barking sharply, Echo darting toward the entryway. Atlas rose but did not bark. He held position like a soldier assessing threat level. "Easy," Owen murmured. "Stand down." His tone was steady, practiced from years of working with Blaze. Atlas responded first, settling but keeping alert. The others followed his cue. When Owen opened the door, a gust of icy wind burst inside, and with it came Hazel Rowan. Hazel, 40 years old, was a veterinarian with the kind of presence that invited comfort long before she spoke. She had warm brown skin, a dusting of freckles across her nose, and dark hair twisted into a loose bun beneath a wool hat. Hazel had always carried softness in her eyes, a softness formed not from ease but from endurance. She had grown up in Frost Harbor, the daughter of a local fisherman and a schoolteacher, and she had spent years rescuing strays long before she ever studied veterinary medicine. Life had not spared her either. 2 winters ago, she had lost her younger brother Liam to a mountaineering accident on Ridgepoint Summit. Since then, Hazel had learned to live with grief the way others lived with weather. Some days brutal, some days bearable, but always present. Yet it had never hardened her. Instead, it made her more protective of anything fragile, and when she received Owen's message that he needed immediate help evaluating the health of several injured shepherds, she arrived without hesitation. "Oh, Owen," Hazel whispered when she stepped inside. The scene before her stunned her into silence. 5 German shepherds in varying degrees of frailty, chains broken, fur matted with cold. But the shock settled quickly into understanding. Hazel approached with slow steps, lowering herself instinctively to make her presence less threatening. "They're terrified," she murmured, "and exhausted. How long were they out there?" Owen shook his head. "I don't know. Enough to break them." Hazel knelt near Bishop first, recognizing that approaching a steady dog would calm the others. Bishop sniffed her hand, then leaned his heavy head gently into her palm. "Good boy," she whispered. "You're safe. Now." One by one she examined them, checking paws for frostbite, feeling ribs, listening to breathing. Atlas accepted her touch cautiously, Wren suspiciously but eventually. Echo kept sniffing her coat, fascinated by the foreign scents. Solace resisted at first, trembling uncontrollably, but Hazel spoke with a softness that eased him. "It's okay, sweetheart. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Owen watched Hazel with quiet admiration. She always had a way of coaxing trust out of creatures who had every reason to fear. After finishing her assessments, Hazel stood and faced him. "They're underweight, dehydrated. Atlas has an old shoulder bruise that's starting to swell. Solace is close to shock from stress. The others have lesser injuries, but Owen..." Her gaze softened. "You saved them in time." He didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the window, to the snowfall blurring the world outside. "I didn't know what else to do," he finally said. "I couldn't leave them." Hazel stepped closer. "That's not what I meant. I meant, I haven't seen you care about anything this deeply since Blaze." Owen's jaw tightened. "This is different." Hazel studied him with a kind of gentle firmness. "No, it's not. And maybe that's a good thing." He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. Hazel began preparing medical supplies from her bag. Salves for frostbite, gauze, electrolyte solution, treats she always carried in case she encountered strays. Owen knelt beside her, helping hold each dog as she applied care. Bishop growled quietly when his side was touched, but Owen's steady hand reassured him. Wren flinched at each movement, yet stayed still for Atlas's sake. Solace trembled less with every passing minute. "They're traumatized," Hazel said softly. "But they're amazing. They still protect each other. They still want to trust." Owen looked at the pack, at the visible shift in their posture now that they had warmth and food. Something inside him, something long buried under guilt, stirred. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "I should name them. They need something that's theirs, something that's not chains." Hazel's smile warmed the room more than the stove. "Tell me." Owen pointed toward the largest shepherd. "That one? He moves like he carries the world on his back. Atlas." Hazel nodded, eyes shining. "Perfect." He gestured to the quick, restless shepherd near the wall. "Wren. He flicks around like a bird ready to take flight." Then the strong one. "Bishop. Solid, loyal." The observant one. "Echo. Always listening." And finally, the trembling pup curled near the couch. Owen spoke his name with a softness he hadn't used in months. "Solace." Because that's what he looked for in the corner, and maybe that's what he'll give someday. Hazel rested a hand on Owen's shoulder. "You realize what this means, right? You're keeping them." "Just temporarily," he said quickly. Hazel's laughter was quiet but full of understanding. "Sure, Owen, temporarily." Outside the window, snowfall thickened again, swirling like white embers in the wind. The cabin, once a shrine of silence and grief, now pulsed with new breath. 5 battered shepherds and the 2 humans determined to mend them. Owen didn't know how to articulate the warmth growing in him. He didn't know how to explain that something within these dogs, their loyalty, their broken bravery, echoed Blaze in ways he wasn't ready for. All he knew was this: last night, he saved them. But today, as Hazel cleaned Solace's trembling paws and Atlas lay gently against his leg, it felt painfully, quietly true that they were saving him back. The ember of something long dead flickered inside him. Something like hope. And though Owen didn't yet realize it, this was the moment their story truly began. Night fell over Frost Harbor like a curtain drawn by an unseen hand, sealing the world in darkness, just as the first roar of the blizzard swept down from the northern ridges. It was the kind of storm old fishermen used to warn their children about. Wind sharp enough to flay the bark off trees, cold deep enough to crack water buckets, snow so thick it erased the horizon. The power lines that hung like frozen vines along Harbor Road flickered once, twice, then surrendered entirely. In an instant, the town disappeared into blackness. Inside Owen Callahan's cabin, the sudden loss of electricity made the silence unnervingly complete. The only light came from the fireplace, a small, stubborn flame fighting a war it was never meant to win against the cold seeping in from the cabin walls. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, 5 German shepherds lay close to Owen, each one sensing the shift in the weather and in him. The wind wasn't the only thing tightening around the room. Owen had spent the day tending to the dogs with Hazel, but after she left, exhaustion seeped into him like cold into stone. He leaned against the table, rubbing his sternum as if trying to massage out an invisible knot. The pain had begun subtly, an ache he'd learned to ignore over the past year. But the dropping temperature aggravated old wounds he never talked about. The explosion that took Blaze hadn't only cost him his partner, it had left him with intermittent cardiac trauma, a reminder stamped deep into muscle and memory. He hated the way his body betrayed him. He hated the weakness it implied. The storm outside intensified, snow whipping against the windows like handfuls of gravel. Atlas paced near the door, ears pointed, reading the blizzard like a soldier reading a battlefield. Wren circled the cabin restlessly, sniffing the air with quick movements. Bishop lay beside the fireplace, his thick fur rising and falling steadily, though he lifted his head every time the wind howled. Echo sat by the window, watching the dark as though it might speak. Solace stayed closest to Owen, pressed against his leg with gentle, trembling loyalty. "Easy, boy," Owen whispered, scratching behind Solace's ear. "It's just the storm." But he didn't sound convinced. He felt the pressure behind his ribs tightening, a pulse of heat followed by a wave of cold. He swallowed, reached for the glass of water on the table, and nearly dropped it. Echo's ears snapped upright. Atlas turned instantly. Wren froze mid-step. Owen tried to inhale and felt a sharp stab beneath his sternum, deep, pulsing, unmistakable. He braced himself against the table, closing his eyes. "Not now," he murmured, voice breaking into the cold air. "Not tonight." But the storm didn't care. Pain radiated down his left arm, faint but crawling. His breath staggered, his legs weakened. He reached for his phone on the counter, but it slipped from his hand, clattering beneath the wooden table. DC. Sound jolted the dogs. Solace let out a worried whine. Bishop lumbered to his feet, stepping toward Owen, nudging his thigh as though urging him upright. Wren barked sharply, a sound that snapped the air. Echo darted under the table, locating the phone instantly, picking up the device gently between his teeth before pacing back toward Owen. Atlas approached slowly, measured, calm, steady. His golden brown eyes locked onto Owen's face. Human or not, the pack sensed a crisis. Owen tried to speak, to reassure them, to deny the panic. But the pain surged and his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the wooden floor, landing hard on his side. Solace immediately pressed himself against Owen's chest, his small body radiating warmth. Bishop nudged blankets from the couch, dragging them clumsily with his teeth, muscles straining, but determination unwavering. Echo dropped the phone beside Owen's hand and nudged it until Owen's fingers brushed the screen. Wren barked again, short, urgent, command-like, circling Owen's head as if calling him back to consciousness. Atlas stood above them all, tail stiff, ears forward, reading the room with the uncanny intelligence of a dog who understood the line between life and loss. The cabin door rattled violently as the storm clawed at it from the outside. The fire sputtered, struggling for air. Owen pressed a weak hand to Solace's fur. "Good boy," he whispered, each word trembling. He tried to unlock the phone, but everything in his body felt slow, heavy. "Hazel," he managed. "Call Hazel." But his hand slipped again, the phone falling to the side. Echo barked in frustration, pawing at the device. Atlas lowered his head, touching his nose to Owen's cheek, a gesture Owen recognized instantly. Blaze used to do the same. Tears stung his eyes, not from pain, but from memory. "I'm not leaving you," Owen whispered to the pack. "Not again." But the darkness around him thickened, his chest tightened further, and dizziness washed through him. He needed help, and fast. Hazel lived on the quieter side of Frost Harbor near the veterinary clinic. It was a 10-minute walk in clear weather, but in a storm like this, even humans would struggle. For dogs, especially weakened ones, it bordered on impossible. Yet the pack didn't hesitate. Atlas nudged Echo sharply, a signal. Echo barked once. Wren stepped forward. Solace whimpered but refused to leave Owen's side. Bishop stood guard beside the fallen officer, positioning himself like a living shield. Atlas turned toward the cabin door, paws braced on the floor, then rammed his shoulder into the doorframe. Once, twice. The third time, Echo joined him, using his lighter frame to hit lower, near the latch. On the fourth impact, the weakened cabin door burst open, snow slamming into the room like a tidal wave of white. The storm howled through the cabin, scattering loose papers and embers. But the dogs didn't flinch. Atlas turned, once toward Owen, just once, eyes full of fierce promise. Then he launched himself into the blizzard. Echo followed. The storm swallowed them instantly, their silhouettes dissolving into the vast white darkness. Wren howled after them, then settled beside Owen, licking his cheek repeatedly to keep him awake. Solace pressed harder against Owen's chest, lending all the warmth he had. Bishop remained at the door, gigantic and unmoving, blocking the worst of the snow from entering, while the others protected the fallen officer. Miles away, at her clinic, Hazel Rowan was finishing up paperwork by lantern light, the blizzard rattling the roof above her. She had planned to spend the night at the clinic in case animals needed help during the power outage. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not two silhouettes crashing through the blizzard like shadows fighting the wind. Atlas slammed his body against the glass door of the clinic, Echo barking furiously. Hazel looked up sharply, thinking at first it was a trick of the storm, but then she saw it. Atlas's massive figure, snow-drenched, panting, and in his mouth. Owen's glove. A faint smear of blood stained the cuff. Hazel's heart lurched. "Owen!" she gasped. She didn't need more explanation. She grabbed her medical kit, threw on her coat, and bolted into the storm. As the blizzard swallowed her footprints, Atlas and Echo ran ahead, guiding her through the white chaos toward the cabin, where Owen lay surrounded by the loyal circle of dogs who refused to leave him. Fate, storm, and the fragile edge of life converged, and none of them knew whether they were already too late. The blizzard did not ease as Hazel Rowan followed Atlas and Echo into the devouring dark. It grew, folding the mountain roads into shifting dunes of snow that swallowed her boots with every step. The storm roared like some ancient beast clawing the ridges of Frost Harbor, and Hazel's lantern flickered wildly, its beam slicing weakly through the white chaos. But she kept moving, breath burning in her lungs, fingers aching, heart pounding with a fear she had not felt since the night her brother Liam died in a winter accident 2 years ago. Tonight felt dangerously similar. Snow, silence, someone she cared for fading into the cold. But this time, she refused to be too late. Atlas led the way, a dark, powerful silhouette cutting confidently through the storm. Echo kept darting back toward Hazel, checking on her, circling her legs, then sprinting forward again. It was almost impossible to believe these two dogs had nearly died of cold and starvation the day before. Now they ran through a blizzard with the determination of warriors. The path to Owen's cabin wound along a forest ridge where the wind hit mercilessly. Snow lashed Hazel's face, freezing her eyelashes. She slipped twice, knees buckling, but Echo barked sharply the second time she fell, pushing his muzzle against her shoulder while Atlas planted himself a few feet ahead, refusing to continue until she stood. You're incredible," Hazel whispered through chattering teeth. She wasn't sure if the message was for the dogs or for the strength she somehow kept finding. The forest grew darker as they climbed, towering pines bending under the storm, branches cracking under the weight of snow. The path became steeper, the roots invisible under white powder. Even the sound of Hazel's breath seemed swallowed by the wind. Finally, through the swirling white, Atlas stopped. The big shepherd lowered his head, sniffed the air, then darted toward a small clearing where a dim, warm glow flickered weakly through the storm. Hazel gasped. Owen's cabin. But something was wrong. The front door hung crookedly, snow piling inside through the broken frame. Hazel's boots slipped as she ran toward it. Atlas barreled forward first, leaping up the steps, Echo right behind him. Inside, the cabin was chaos. Wind screaming through the open door, snow gusting in swirls across the wooden floor. The fire had nearly died, reduced to a few glowing embers. Papers had blown across the room. A lamp lay shattered, and in the middle of the floor, half covered by a blanket dragged from the couch, lay Owen Callahan. He was pale, too pale. Hazel's breath caught. "Owen!" She stumbled toward him, falling to her knees beside his limp body. His skin was cold beneath her fingertips, his pulse weak and rapid under her touch. His breaths came shallow, strained by the weight of the storm and the crushing pain in his chest. But he was alive, barely. Around him, the other shepherds, Wren, Solace, and Bishop, formed a loose, protective circle. Bishop stood like a fortress at Owen's back, blocking the worst of the wind. Wren paced anxiously, tail low, but eyes fiercely alert, barking softly every few seconds as if begging Owen to stay awake. Solace, trembling but determined, pressed himself against Owen's ribs, lending what little warmth his small body could offer. Hazel felt her throat tighten. "You boys, you protected him. You really did." Atlas padded to Hazel's side and lowered his head to nudge Owen's hand. The touch made Owen stir faintly, his eyelids fluttering but not opening. Hazel immediately reached for her medical kit, her hands shaking with urgency as she pulled out a thermal blanket and wrapped it around Owen's torso and shoulders. Then she placed heated gel packs around his chest and beneath his arms. She spoke softly, firmly, the way she always did with animals, and now with Owen. "Stay with me, you hear me? You stubborn mountain of a man, don't you dare leave these dogs after what they just did for you." The cabin answered only with the howl of the storm. Hazel placed her fingers along his neck again, still faint, still erratic, but present. Relief washed through her in a trembling exhale. Okay. We can work with this." She looked toward the dogs. "I need to get him to the rescue team. I can't carry him alone." As if understanding, Bishop stepped toward her. The moment Hazel moved to lift Owen's shoulders, Bishop pushed his massive body beneath Owen's back, helping prop him upright. Wren grabbed the corner of the blanket with his teeth, pulling it into a makeshift sling. Solace stayed glued to Owen's chest, warming him. Echo pressed himself against Owen's legs, and Atlas, always the leader, positioned at Owen's side, head close to Hazel, waiting for her signal. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" Hazel whispered. "All of you." She sent a distress call through the radio clipped to her belt. Static crackled violently through the storm, and for a moment Hazel feared the signal wouldn't carry. But then a voice answered, thin but clear. "Hazel, Rowan, we copy. Storm's bad. What's your location?" "Owen Callahan's cabin. Severe medical emergency. He needs evacuation now. Hang tight. We're on our way." Hazel tucked the radio back and exhaled. "Help is coming." Minutes later, though it felt far longer, the faint glow of headlights cut through the trees. The rescue truck crawled along the snow-packed ridge, its beams flickering like lanterns in the blizzard. Hazel rushed to the door, waving both arms. "In here!" Two rescuers climbed out. John Merrick, a seasoned mountain responder with a calm, square-jawed steadiness, and Clara Hensley, younger but sharp-eyed and quick, always first to volunteer for night missions. John had a tall, muscular frame built by years of climbing and carrying stranded hikers. Clara was smaller but fierce, with quick hands and quicker instincts. They both froze at the sight inside. Owen unconscious, dogs surrounding him with unshakable devotion, snow swirling through the broken doorway. "Dear God," John murmured. "How long has he been down?" "Not long enough to lose him," Hazel said, steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. "But we need to move fast." John and Clara carried the stretcher into the cabin. The moment they approached, Atlas stepped between them and Owen, chest puffed, stance protective. Wren mirrored him with a sharp bark. Hazel stepped forward. "Atlas, Wren, it's okay. They're here to help." Atlas slowly lowered his head. Wren eased back. The rescuers exchanged a look of astonished respect. With Hazel's guidance and the dogs helping around the edges, they lifted Owen onto the stretcher. His breath hitched at the movement, but steadied again. "Let's go," Clara said, gripping the stretcher handles. As the rescuers carried him out, the 5 shepherds followed, Atlas in front, Bishop supporting the back, Echo staying close to the side, Wren running ahead as scout, Solace trotting at Owen's feet. The path to the truck was a brutal push through snow and wind. Every step slid on ice. Every gust nearly knocked them sideways. Hazel walked beside the stretcher, holding Owen's hand inside her glove, whispering reassurances he couldn't hear. "We're almost there. Stay with us." John opened the back doors of the rescue truck, and they lifted Owen inside. Hazel climbed in right after him, checking his pulse again, adjusting the thermal blanket. But what happened next startled even the hardened rescuers. The 5 shepherds, despite the freezing wind, despite the darkness, refused to move away. They lined up against the truck, pressing close to the metal, forming a living barrier around the man who had saved them the previous night. They're not leaving him," Clara whispered in awe. "Let them in," Hazel said firmly. "They belong with him." John hesitated only a second before nodding. He opened the back hatch. One by one, the shepherds jumped inside, settling around Owen like the circle they had formed earlier. Atlas near his head, Bishop on guard at the door, Wren beside Hazel, Echo at Owen's feet, Solace curled against his ribs. Clara pulled the doors shut, and the rescue truck lurched forward, carving through the storm toward Frost Harbor Medical. And as the headlights tore through the blizzard, the image inside the truck became a moment the townspeople would speak of for years. 5 German shepherds guarding one unconscious officer, their breaths rising in warm clouds, their bodies forming a protective ring strong enough to defy the cold itself. A circle of loyalty, a circle of hope, a circle of life refusing to give up. The Winter Sentinels, though not yet named, had already begun their legend. Spring did not arrive quickly in Frost Harbor. It crept in cautiously, as if afraid the mountains might reject it. Snow lingered long after the calendar insisted it should have melted, clinging to the shade of trees and the edges of rooftops. But where winter retreated even gently, the signs were unmistakable. Icicles dripping with slow patience, the smell of thawing pine needles, and birds returning hesitantly to branches still dusted with white. Within this half-winter, half-spring world, Owen Callahan woke slowly in a recovery ward of Frost Harbor Medical. He tasted metal. He heard the steady beep of a heart monitor. And he felt warmth, heavy, comforting warmth, pressed against his legs and arms. When he opened his eyes, he realized why. All 5 German shepherds were there. Atlas lay closest to his head, massive frame curled protectively along the mattress. Bishop sat on the floor beside the bed, like an immovable guardian carved from obsidian. Wren sprawled near Owen's feet, tail faintly thumping every few seconds in a restless rhythm. Echo stood on his hind legs, front paws resting on the side rail, watching Owen's face with curious intensity. Solace was half on the bed, half on Hazel's lap, trembling every now and then with tiny relieved whimpers. Hazel Rowan sat by Owen's side, exhausted but awake, her hair loose around her shoulders, a cup of cold coffee untouched in her hands. When she saw Owen blink fully awake, she let out a breath she must have been holding for hours. "Hey," she whispered. "Welcome back." Owen swallowed. His voice felt rusty. You found me." Hazel shook her head gently. "They found me?" She motioned toward Atlas, whose golden brown eyes met Owen's with a depth that should not have been possible for a dog that had nearly frozen days earlier. Owen felt something tighten in his chest, not pain this time, Something warmed, something thawed. I didn't, Owen's voice cracked. I didn't think I'd wake up. Hazel leaned closer, her voice low and steady. You almost didn't. But they wouldn't let you go. None of them. As if understanding, Solace pressed his nose into Owen's shoulder. Wren nudged Echo aside to climb closer. Bishop exhaled deeply, settling into the floor with a weight of relief. Atlas rested his chin near Owen's ribs, closing his eyes with the calm confidence of a leader who had completed his mission. Hazel continued, You'll need a few weeks off work. Your heart took a beating, and the storm didn't help. But you're going to be okay. Owen nodded, looking slowly at every dog around him. They saved my life. Hazel smiled softly. Yes. And I think they're planning to do it again anytime you even sneeze. After 2 days of monitoring, Hazel drove Owen back to his cabin, newly repaired after the storm, courtesy of several neighbors who heard what had happened and volunteered to help. The townspeople were shaken by the story. 5 shepherds who had survived cruelty, then risked the storm to save the officer who saved them. Whispers spread through the diners, the general store, the post office. Children begged their parents to drive past Owen's cabin just to catch sight of the storm dogs. The story softened Frost Harbor's winter-worn heart. Owen stood outside the cabin, leaning on Hazel for balance while the dogs sprinted around the yard with a joy he had not seen in them before. Atlas barked once, a deep commanding sound, before herding the others into a loose circle. Owen let out a quiet laugh. He's really their leader. Well, Hazel said, every team needs one. Over the next weeks, Owen slowly regained strength. Days were filled with physical therapy appointments, short walks around the cabin, and long hours of rest. But he was never alone. Whenever Owen sat by the fireplace, Solace lay across his feet like a living blanket. When he tried to do chores too soon, Bishop nudged him back toward the couch. Echo followed him room to room, observing every movement as if recording a map of Owen's habits. Wren became the household alarm, barking every time something unusual happened, even if that something unusual was just a falling pine cone. And Atlas. Atlas stayed closest of all, sometimes sitting by the door like a sentinel, sometimes lying next to Owen, heartbeat steady and grounding, sometimes simply watching him with an expression that said, I will notice if you fall again. Owen found himself talking more, to Hazel, to the dogs, even to the empty space where Blaze's collar still hung above the mantel. Nights no longer felt suffocating. Mornings no longer felt like battles. Healing was slow, yes, but healing was happening. One afternoon, Hazel arrived with news. There's an alert from the sheriff's department, she said, stepping into the cabin. 2 students didn't come home from a photography project in the hills. Storm remnant winds are still bad up there. They need volunteers for search crews. The words hit Owen like a bell rung inside his ribcage. His instinct stirred instantly, an old, familiar call to go, to search, to save. But he froze. His recovery wasn't complete. His chest wasn't reliable. Hazel stepped closer, reading his conflict. You don't have to go, she whispered. No one expects you to. Then he looked around the cabin, at the 5 shepherds watching him with alert eyes. The same 5 who survived cruelty, who broke into a blizzard for him, who stayed by his hospital bed, who had become the living pulse of his recovery. And Owen realized something. Those dogs were not meant to stay hidden in this cabin, nor was he. Hazel, he said quietly, we can help. She hesitated, then nodded. But we go smart, and we stay within limits. They left within minutes, Hazel grabbing gear, Owen donning his old K9 harnesses and attaching them to each dog with practiced ease. The pack transformed instantly. Atlas tall and proud, Echo scanning for scents, Wren twitching with readiness, Bishop wearing a lightweight pulling harness, Solace trembling but determined. Remember, Owen murmured, kneeling to their level, we're a team. Stay close. Trust each other. They understood. In the forest, snow still lay along the ridges in thick patches, hiding hazards beneath. The wind carried faint traces of pine sap and distant cold. Owen let Echo lead, the dog's nose sharp, navigating the air with remarkable precision. Wren barked to signal fresh tracks. Bishop moved forward steadily, pushing branches aside and clearing paths. Solace whined softly, then walked closer to Hazel, stepping carefully over fallen logs. Atlas trotted ahead beside Owen, constantly checking between the trail and his human. After an hour, Echo froze. His head snapped toward a cluster of trees shaped like a crooked arch. He sniffed deep, then whined. "He's got something," Owen said. They pushed through the narrow clearing, and there, beneath a thick tree, two children huddled together. A boy and a girl, no older than 14, soaked with melted snow, shivering violently. Fear clouded their eyes until they saw the dogs. Then relief washed over their faces like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. Solace immediately pressed himself against the girl's side, warming her with his soft coat. Wren licked the boy's frozen fingers. Echo barked twice, sharp, triumphant. "We've got them," Hazel said, already checking pulses. Bishop lowered himself so Hazel could use his broad back as a brace while attending to the boy's ankle. "We'll need to carry them back," Hazel said. "They're too cold to walk." Bishop helped pull the boy on a makeshift sled Hazel assembled from Owen's pack. Solace and Wren stayed closest to the girl, warming and calming her. Echo scouted the trail. Atlas walked at Owen's side, matching his pace, as if grounding both man and mission. They brought the kids safely to the rescue teams waiting at the ridge. News spread quickly through Frost Harbor. Owen Callahan and the 5 shepherds had saved 2 young lives. By nightfall, townspeople had given them a name: the Winter Sentinels. Guardians born from snow, bound by loyalty, rescued from darkness only to become light for others. Owen stood outside his cabin that evening, the dogs resting around him as the last snowflakes of late winter drifted through the air. He placed a quiet hand on Atlas's head. "You boys aren't just survivors," he whispered. "You're protectors, each one of you." And for the first time since losing Blaze, Owen felt whole. Spring deepened slowly in Frost Harbor, unfolding like a shy guest, unsure whether the mountains would welcome or reject her. Though the ridgelines remained frosted and white, the valleys below began to thaw, streams whispering again under melting snow, pine branches shedding their icy burdens, and the air carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of renewal. A year passed this way, quietly, like a long exhale from a town that had learned how fragile and miraculous life could be. And in that year, Owen Callahan rebuilt not only his cabin, but himself. The cabin, once a lonely refuge of grief, had transformed into something alive, warm, expansive. The original structure remained, the old stone fireplace, the creaking pinewood floors, but new wings had been added with the help of neighbors, donated lumber, and the gentle insistence of Hazel Rowan, whose steady presence had become the rhythm of Owen's days. To the right of the cabin stretched a new training yard enclosed in timber fencing, sturdy but welcoming. Behind the cabin, a converted shed now stood as a medical room, fitted with supplies Hazel had brought when she transferred ownership of her downtown clinic. The place was no longer just Owen's home. It was a sanctuary. A sign hung on the arched wooden gate at the entrance of the property, carved by a retired carpenter who insisted on contributing after hearing how the pack saved Owen during the blizzard. The letters had been etched deep, filled with black paint, and coated to withstand mountain winters. Frost Harbor Shepherd Refuge. Stas. Below the sign, the silhouettes of 5 German shepherds were carved in a sweeping arc: Atlas, Wren, Bishop, Echo, and Solace, each captured in a stance that mirrored their role in the pack. It had been Hazel's idea. Owen had pretended to protest, but secretly, the first time he ran his fingers across the carved letters, he had felt something like pride warm his chest. On this late winter afternoon, snowflakes drifted lazily from a pale sky, falling gently over the training yard as Owen stepped outside, wearing his old K9 jacket, repaired so many times it looked more like memory than fabric. Around him moved the 5 shepherds who had become legends in Frost Harbor. Atlas walked beside him with the confidence of a seasoned captain. Now 4 years old, he carried a calm authority, shoulders square, posture controlled, eyes always scanning the perimeter, as if every shift in wind mattered. Wren darted across the yard in swift zigzags, forever restless, his lean frame built for speed and his instincts tuned sharply to sound and movement. Bishop, strong as ever, pushed an empty training sled with his chest, growling playfully as if daring the wind to challenge him. Echo moved with quiet intelligence, analyzing scent trails hidden under snow, and Solace, no longer trembling, no longer shrinking from touch, trotted proudly beside Hazel, tail up, steps light, eyes bright with trust restored. Hazel watched them with a soft smile. "They've changed so much," she said, adjusting her scarf while Solace nudged her hand. "They changed me first," Owen replied. Hazel turned her gaze to him, eyes warm beneath the falling snow. "You changed each other." There had been a time when Owen believed his heart was a locked room, sealed the night Blaze died. But the shepherds had picked the lock, not with force, but with presence, loyalty, and a kind of quiet devotion he could not turn away from. It was Solace who lay on his chest during the worst nights. It was Echo who woke him from nightmares. It was Atlas who leaned against him whenever memories threatened to drown him. Hazel had seen every moment of it, the healing, the rebuilding, and though neither of them said it aloud, something deeper had grown between them, a partnership that went beyond shared responsibility, a tenderness neither rushed but both felt. Today was the 1-year anniversary of the rescue that had bound their lives together. Volunteers from town would arrive soon for the celebration. Children would come to see the dogs. Elderly neighbors would bring warm pies and knitted blankets. The sheriff would make a small speech, and Owen, though uncomfortable with crowds, had agreed to say a few words. But for now, the world held only the quiet of falling snow and the steady breath of the 5 shepherds circling their yard. Inside the cabin, a stack of freshly printed books rested on the wooden table. Owen's first memoir. Hazel ran her hand over the cover as she brought one out to show him. The title read, "The Winter Sentinels Saved Me First." A photograph graced the cover. Owen kneeling, Atlas at his side, and the other 4 shepherds forming a half circle behind him. It wasn't staged. Clara Hensley, the rescuer from the blizzard night, had captured the moment months ago during a training session. The image radiated loyalty, strength, and a quiet kind of love. "You ready for people to read this?" Hazel asked, eyebrows raised. "No," Owen admitted, "but they should know the truth." "What truth?" "That I didn't rescue them." "Not really." Hazel's smile was gentle. "I think everyone already knows." Soon the field filled with townspeople from Frost Harbor, bundled in coats, boots crunching on snowflakes, laughter rising through crisp air. Children ran ahead, shouting in delight when Atlas padded toward them, tail wagging. Bishop offered himself as a climbing wall for 3 toddlers. Wren played tag with older kids. Echo gently guided a shy boy who had never touched a dog before. And Solace lay beside a little girl who leaned her cheek against his soft coat. Neighbors approached Owen with warm handshakes and grateful smiles. "You saved those kids. Glad you're still with us, Callahan. These dogs, they're something else." Owen accepted each greeting with humility, though he insisted the praise belonged to the shepherds, not him. Hazel stood by his side, laughing softly whenever he grew uncomfortable with compliments, nudging him when he forgot to smile. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long gold shadows across the snow, the crowd finally quieted. The sheriff called for a moment of silence to honor the storm that nearly claimed Owen's life, but instead revealed the heart of Frost Harbor. Then he motioned for Owen to step forward. Owen swallowed hard, took a breath that felt like walking into cold water, and spoke. "I don't know much about speeches," he began, voice steady but soft. "But I know about second chances. These dogs were left to die. I was losing myself too. Maybe God brought us together because none of us were meant to walk alone. They saved me in ways I can't fully explain. And this refuge exists because every life deserves warmth, purpose, and a place to return home to." As if on cue, all 5 shepherds gathered at his feet, Atlas leaning against his leg, Solace settling by Hazel, Wren brushing against his hand, Echo pressing close to the children behind him, Bishop lowering his head in quiet pride. When the applause spread through the crowd, Owen felt his chest warm, not the painful tightening he once feared, but a fullness he had almost forgotten was possible. Hazel stepped forward, her shoulder brushing his. "You did good," she whispered. "So did they." "And so did you," she replied. Snowflakes drifted around them like gentle blessings. As the sun set, Frost Harbor glowed in soft orange light, the mountains catching the glow until they appeared wrapped in fire. Owen stood before his expanded cabin, surrounded by a community that had once watched him withdraw, but now watched him rise again. The 5 shepherds nestled around him in a loose circle, their breaths rising in small clouds, their eyes reflecting the fading light. He looked at the refuge sign, at the dogs, at Hazel, and felt something soft and sacred settle inside him. "I thought I was the one saving them," he whispered, more to the snow than anyone else. "But the truth is, God sent them to save me." Hazel touched his arm. He did. The mountains stood quiet. The snow fell light. And in Frost Harbor, winter no longer meant loneliness. It meant loyalty, rebirth, and the silent miracle of 5 shepherds who loved without question and guarded without fear. The Winter Sentinels. A family shaped by storm. A refuge built by love. A story just beginning. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with bright flashes or thunder. Sometimes they come quietly through the loyalty of a dog that refuses to give up, through a friend who shows up at the right moment, or through the strength God places in our hearts when we feel too tired to keep going. This story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of our lives, God walks beside us. He guides our steps, protects our families, and sends help in ways we often recognize only after the storm has passed. In our everyday struggles, when we face worry, loneliness, or burden, faith calls us to look for those small signs, those quiet blessings, the gentle ways God shows He has never left us. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection. And if you believe in the gentle miracles He sends, type Amen in the comments.